From the halls of Austin to the fights in D.C. that hit us at home, this is Politics with the Big Dogs.
Hello, hello, hello. This is Anthony Holm, host of Politics with the Big Dogs, and we have a great show for you today, guys. We have Tony Ortiz on with us. Tony is the publisher of Current Revolt. It's an online news entity that has grown over the last several years into hardcore, cutting-edge news, primarily on Republican politics in the Texas Legislature, heavy emphasis also in the DFW markets, conservative issues, conservative individuals. We're going to touch on Jorge Borrego, who's a Republican nominee for a swing seat in south side of San Antonio. Did Governor Abbott, frankly, and special interests cost us that seat? I believe it did. We're going to get Tony's take on it. He broke a scandalous story about Borrego recently, and so we're going to hear about it. Tony also exposed Giovanni Capriglione, who was a longtime Republican state representative in the Grapevine area of DFW, and similarly Tony Gonzales, a U.S. congressman. Multiple Republicans exposed for Bryan Slaton. We're going to speak about all of this, exposed for just wrought hypocrisy and totally inappropriate violations. We're going to have a discussion. Will Dustin Burrows be Speaker again? And I'll tell you, I think he is. I think he will. And can Republicans pass meaningful policy through the Texas House next session when they have fewer Republicans? And did Abbott cost us at least one of those seats? I think we all expect at least a few Democrats to pick up Republican-held seats in November. I am real confident at least one of them, and it was delivered to us by Abbott and the special interests, in my strong opinion. So what does that mean to policy outcomes next session? We have a great show up for you. Hold on tight, because here we go.
More with Anthony Holm coming up in just a minute. Don't forget to sign up for our newsletter at politicswiththebigdogs.com. While you're there, make sure you listen to our previous episodes of Politics with the Big Dogs. Politics with the Big Dogs is brought to you by the First Amendment Alliance Education Fund. Got a question for Anthony Holm? Email Anthony at politicswiththebigdogs.com. Now, more with Anthony Holm on Politics with the Big Dogs.
All right, folks, if you're just joining us, Anthony Holm, host of Politics with the Big Dogs, and we have a big dog with us today. Tony Ortiz, the publisher of Current Revolt. You guys will have heard me talk about Current Revolt over these programs, because I've sourced a lot of content from there, and I try very hard, Tony, to source it and give credit and help drive people back and promote you. If I failed on anything I covered, then I apologize. So thank you for joining us today.
Man, thanks for having me, Anthony. Two Tonys, two Anthonys.
There you go. And tell us a little bit about Current Revolt. I became familiar with it 5 or 6 years ago, but I became a pretty devoted follower, 2-ish years ago. Tell us.
Yeah, Current Revolt, started it in 2020, kind of spawned out of frustrations from COVID. Just me and a couple guy friends that were just frustrated being locked in and all the crazy lockdowns, just the normal frustrations any patriotic American would have with the COVID issues. And we just started writing our frustrations. So we kind of started mostly as an op-ed, kind of wheels off sort of right-wing piece, and then we slowly evolved into kind of like the Texas tabloid. We publish a lot of different things happening throughout Texas and a lot of articles and going places that maybe more legacy media wouldn't cover.
That's been my observation of it. I became exposed to it some years ago, as I said, and it wasn't quite in my bailiwick at the time, but I got to say, your top 3 for sure of Capitol Inside political coverage that I follow and people that I know follow. So number 1, congratulations. Number 2, thank you. And folks, I encourage you to sign up. currentrevolt.org?
Currentrevolt.com. We own the .org too, but yeah, okay. .com.
Fair enough. I've been getting a daily email from them with really interesting topics for at least 2 years. I became a paid subscriber at some point along the way. I think I don't remember what it is, $8 or what? Tell us.
It's cheap. It's only $6 a month. That's it.
There you go.
Yeah, so, we keep it low despite inflation.
There we go. So, look, you've broken so many great stories, so many powerful things that hadn't gotten picked up. And a number of Republicans resigned over them. Capriglione comes to mind. But Jorge Borrego, who I've spoken about on Politics with the Big Dogs in the past, but you broke a story in the last 24 hours. And that's what I wanted to visit with you about. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so Borrego is running for House District 118, which is a vacated seat. I think it was previously who occupied that one? It was
Lujan. So it's
Lujan,
a marginal
right.
seat. It's the south side of San Antonio, and a Republican named Lujan held it, which was a big deal because it's a hard seat to hold. So sorry, please continue.
No, no, thank you. And so, open seat. And so, Borrego was, I guess, the one of the candidates chosen, or one of three candidates running in the Republican Party. He ran against Desi Martinez and Joe Shellhart. It was a relatively, I want to say it was a tight race, but I mean, you look at the end up numbers and, Borrego got 52 and, Martinez and Shellhart split around 27 and 20 respectively. But yeah, so now he's running against a Democrat. Her name is, Kristen Carranza. And, so yesterday, I was honestly working at the cafe and some of these old tweets of his kind of surfaced, and they're not good. They're not good. We can get into it if you want right away, but I don't know if you want to review anything. But yeah, they're not great tweets. They're not great tweets.
Well, you're very gracious and kind. Let's do it this way. So we go across Salem's network in Texas. This show airs San Antonio, Houston, and the Metroplex, DFW, at different times, frankly. But it's on Salem. We have strong conservatives and Christian-minded individuals. Let's not use cuss words.
Right.
And let's not use genitalia. We can kind of,
yes.
We can say beep or, insert the word here. But tell us about it, because it wasn't just one or two. I saw at least 20 that you posted. There may have been 30 or 40, and some of it is pretty shocking, and at least one of them I'm very troubled by. So please.
Yeah. And so, the posts in Borrego's defense, the posts are from 2011. They range from 2011 to 2017. And he was aged, like 15, 16, all the way up to I believe 20 years old, 19 years old. And so it was during a younger time of his life. Although when I read back some of these messages, and again, I'm going to censor them, but I look back at my time as a 15 or 16 year old, and I don't remember talking like this at all, or even thinking about things like this. But, in some of these text messages, he goes on about, trying a little bit of a drug that also is known as a soda. And,
very clever.
Yeah, I may be a little, soda. F it, let's go to the strip club. I'm down, I'll bring soda. Feel like snorting some soda. I wasn't kidding about the soda. And so he talks about doing lines of this stuff, and, it's pretty descriptive. And, then he's got some text messages where he's calling people bad names and using some slurs, and, he uses the N-word without the hard R. But you go into the really kind of the wild stuff, and there's some posts about him giving at least discussing his username on a pornographic website. He discusses possibly using steroids. And he discusses that he struggles to see his private parts due to his weight. So it's just very graphic, very odd. It's just a weird barrage of text messages. And for me, thank God, I think you and I are both old enough that we remember time before the internet, before social media.
Hallelujah.
And then we remember time when we were in that. And I personally am also glad that a lot of my social media does not exist anymore. Not because I did anything bad, but because I did so much. It was so embarrassing and cringy. It was just I think back at the stuff I said and wrote, and I was like, oh, that's so dorky and lame. But yeah, these text messages, because he's in an era of a younger era, the internet's written in pen, and for some reason, I don't know, his consultant or whoever's managing him didn't say, hey, you should audit your social media or clean it up before you run for office.
It is surprising. So there's a lot here, folks. There's just so much. And I'm going to try to break it into categories, Tony, if this makes sense to you. You don't have to always follow them, but there's the content itself, and you're very gracious for him, because you're saying the guy was 16, 17, 18, but it appears that he was in his 19s and 20s as well when many of these were written. So there's the content itself from my perspective. There's how he's responded to it today, 8 years later, 6 years later, 10 years later in some instances, as an adult and as somebody who is running for the Texas House. He is the Republican nominee in a marginal seat running for the Texas House. And then, because I covered this race on the show, I don't know, weeks ago, maybe even months ago, I want to back up and talk about some of the race, because it is a marginal seat. Lujan held it for the Republicans. It's been tough for a while. And Lujan said, okay, here's the guy who can hold it, Desi Martinez. This is who I'm anointing, brought him into his campaign. He said, I'm going to run for Congress. This is a guy that can hold it. I want to take care of the Republican caucus. But Desi was a trial lawyer, a Republican trial lawyer, and TLR, Texans for Lawsuit Reform, and Abbott and others said, well, we can't have a Republican trial lawyer in the Texas House because he'll be able to out us, on our policies. So they put all this money into Borrego, and Borrego ended up winning. So I want to go and revisit that at some point, because I think there's even a bigger narrative, or a similar narrative, at least as in size and scope, that we want to discuss. But let's stick for the here and now into these. And you are so gracious. Look, a couple of them, like, I hate it when my nipples and my thing gets hard at the same time, or is that just me? Just really shocking. Tony, you and I know each other. We don't know each other. I have 2 daughters. Do you have children?
I do not.
Okay. Well, good, because here's the one that I'm most troubled about. And this is a quote. Hey, guys, to his pal, here's how you get out of the friend zone with a girl, right? Well, I'll paraphrase, because he didn't actually say girl. He just said friend zone. : you just whip your blank out and you tell her she's going to learn today. Like, that's beyond I'm a knucklehead, I'm drinking a beer. That's just, that's wholly inappropriate. And this guy wants to be an elected official, wants to be a role model. So I'd like us to stay in some of the content, because then I want to ask you about how he handled it. Because I just saw, like, laugh out loud. Oh, yeah, I was a teenager back then. And I'm going to suggest that is not accountability as an adult. So
yeah, I mean,
what am I missing here?
It's super inappropriate for sure. And, like, I was laughing when I described some of these, because some of these are funny, right?
Sure,
but, like,
sure.
the ones you're reading, for sure, like, grossly inappropriate. Again, I'm not a father, but if I had daughters that were considering, being interns or working in the Capitol, even not just with this guy, but even near this guy, I may be a little concerned about their being near in a room, even alone with this guy, just based off of the way he's talked. So yeah, I think it is a problem, right? And he didn't address it. I'm trying to be fair. I'm looking at it's August 25th, 11 a.m. and I'm looking at his X account right now, and he has not addressed it. His official response to the tweets was, "I was 16, LOL."
Well,
I mean,
even if it's true, which is not, because it's all different years, but even
right.
if it's true, you got to address them in the here and now. Like, I regret them. I shouldn't have done it. Just being 16. Had he actually done that, and maybe he did to a woman, to a girl when he was 16, I'm just going to whip it out and say, you're going to learn today. It doesn't make it right. If you had broken into and stolen something at 16, it doesn't make it right. If you sexually assault someone at 16, it doesn't make it right. Even if you're a mature, developed individual, 12 years later, 10 years later, you say, hey, we can't condone this. I was punished. Here's what happened. Bam, bam, bam. And it was wrong. And I stand by that. But instead it's, oh, let's all laugh about it because I was a teenager. Well, you're a teenager driving and dating and taking girls to the prom, and this is what you're putting out there. So I hadn't even thought about the interning or working with or the sexual predator nature that you just flagged. It's a valid point. Like,
yeah, I mean, that's the biggest issue. It's one of the least well, I shouldn't say least, but one of the things I talked about a lot in Texas politics is a lot of the young women actually do go through some pretty, sometimes, not always, but some bad behavior by some of the men that work in the Capitol. And this isn't always the case, of course, and I am using a broad stroke, and I'm not trying to be like a feminist or anything here, but it is an area where, I've talked to a lot of young ladies that work at the Capitol, and they describe some pretty rough working environments sometimes. And then when you're bringing in a new individual that has a history of saying things like that, you're not necessarily making that environment any better. That's for sure.
And folks, if you're just joining us, this is Anthony Holm, host of Politics with the Big Dog, and we have Tony Ortiz of Current Revolt, currentrevolt.com, an incredible online news source for Texas politics focused on conservative policy, often in the Metroplex, but statewide, and certainly all of the Capitol focus. So you just brought up a really powerful point, and again, you're giving so much grace. I'm going to remind us that we had a Republican state representative who was kicked out of the chamber for sexually abusing a staffer. And how long? That was in the last 5 years for sure.
Yeah, we were the first ones to break that story too. It was Bryan Slaton, who, ironically enough, on the political spectrum, I don't think there was anybody right of Bryan Slaton. But the scandal there was that he he was a married man with kids, and he had an affair with his, I believe she was like 19 at the time, 19-year-old staffer, and took her back to his condo and did some inappropriate things, and then bought her the morning after pill. And he was removed from the house, and right after he had voluntarily stepped down. So it is absolutely an issue that somebody who has said things like that is being considered for office, and I do think that he should officially address it. The fact that at least his official response so far today has been, "I was 16, LOL," and then another response was, "I'm 30 currently," or "I'm 30, so yeah, I was a teenager." Like, just dismissing it is kind of like, because again, I mean, I was a big nerd in school, so maybe it's me, maybe I'm unique here with the rest of the nerds, but I didn't think about this stuff or talk this way, at least when I was 15, 16 years old. I don't know. So it is inappropriate. And again, if I would be concerned if I had a child working in Capitol being near this person.
That's a fair point. And look, I want to give you more credit. You broke the Slaton story. I thought you had, but I couldn't quite remember. And then you broke the Gio story. And tell us about that, because here's a guy who's a 12-year religious conservative or 14-year Republican House member and leader and all of these things. He had been there a long time. I don't remember the exact number of years. And per your reporting, he had like a multi-year affair with a exotic dancer on the side. Yeah. So tell us about that too. Like, folks, this is all true. It all came out, and Tony broke them. But for Current Revolt and Tony Ortiz, I'm not sure we'd know that. To include Borrego's, I'd never go onto somebody's X and shoot. I don't even, hardly know how to post one for myself. So tell us about Gio.
Yeah, so Giovanni Capriglione is a Republican House representative up in the kind of like the South Lake Grapevine area. And here in DFW, in Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. And, in last year, in July of last year, we had written an article where we'd connected with a former exotic dancer who she made allegations of having an incredibly long-term affair with him starting in 2004. And so, she had some evidence as well as her testimony, and we recorded that interview on video. We published it. We even went so far as to what's it called, to do a lie detector test on her regarding her testimony, which according to the test she did pass. But yeah, she detailed a very specific, very detailed experience of her relationship with Capriglione. And, then it comes, and this is a guy who was committed to running for re-election. He had even been endorsed by Donald Trump in July of 2025. So less than a month later, our article comes out, and he puts out a statement. He puts out a statement 3 days before our article comes out, saying that he had, after much reflection, prayer, and conversation with his family, he decided not to seek re-election to the House of Representatives. And then, of course, 3 days later, our article comes out. So yeah, you do have a history of like kind of some degenerate behavior in the Capitol. And, you know, it's again, like, it all circles back to, like, is this an environment we want young people working in? You know,
Doesn't that say a lot? Like, holy smokes, do we want our children and you know, early 20-year-old Texans working in the Capitol because of the degenerate behavior of Republican elected officials and Democrat elected officials? Right? We had one that got caught throwing away Coke, a state representative, and actually had it in an envelope with his name on it, and we know his name was on it because it was printed by the taxpayer. It was like the office of X, and that was in the last few years. But you guys break many of these stories, so the hypocrisy is so astounding to me. And but for Current Revolt, I don't know that this stuff would be exposed. So thank you, and shoot, I learn a lot from y'all.
Appreciate it. Yeah, you know, we it's kind of interesting. We just cover a lot of the things that just the mainstream media won't get to fast enough. You know, you had that same issue just with what was it, Tony Gonzales? We broke the story.
Oh,
I think it went as
right.
far back as October of last year. I want to say it was October of last year, where Gonzales had been having an affair with one of his staffers. And, you know, I mean, this is a long story, and maybe we don't have to get into it now, but incredibly long story short, she suffered some mental trauma and some issues and stress related to that affair, plus a pending, or at least an active, divorce that her and her husband were going through, kind of related to the affair, the discovery of that affair with Tony Gonzales. And, you know, she committed suicide by, I think the scientific term is self-immolation. She lit herself on fire. Just horrible, horrible tragedy, you know. And a lot of this stuff could be prevented if, you know, if these people need to behave better. And these are Republicans, you know.
Or at least, even if you misbehave, be honest about it, right? So Tony Gonzales, folks, is Republican U.S. congressman from the Valley. And he first came out and said, oh, this is all lies, and denied it. And Tony Ortiz, who we're talking to now, broke that story. It went international. Everybody started covering it, but it took a long time because they didn't believe it. When a U.S. congressman or a state representative like Giovanni comes out and denies something, or in this instance, Jorge Borrego, right, a Republican nominee who has had Abbott show up in his district, Governor Abbott campaign for him, make donations, the TLR money machine campaign for him, make donations, and this is what happens, right? So Gonzales said, oh, no, none of it's true, as I recall the timeline. Maybe I'm in error. Denied it for a long time. This lady, this poor young lady, they were both married. They both had children. And Tony Gonzales, all those text messages came out of him being very aggressive. Send me this erotic photo. Do this for me. Pick me up here. Let's do that. And sure, she's saying no, 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 and finally kind of surrendering is my take on it. She sat in her mom's home, apparently, and covered herself with gasoline and lit herself on fire. And then he showed up to the funeral, didn't he, while he was still denying it all?
Yeah, I'm not sure about that part. That's possible. I may have missed it. But, you know, the bigger part, that I guess some of the untold story on this is that there was several reporters, including myself, that were chasing down leads on additional women that had alleged at that point that they had affairs with Tony Gonzales. And I had obtained some text messages myself of conversations he had with some staffers that were not this woman that had committed suicide. So I think it was kind of interesting because like you said, you know, when this story first came out, he completely denied it. He said all of it's fake, not real. You know, and I think I remember Bayless Wagner from, at the time she worked for San Antonio Express. Now she's at the New York Times, but she had asked him on record to his face at TribFest. I want to say back in like November last year or something like that. You know, are these allegations true? And he said absolutely not. So he just like straight up denied them. And then, you know, people are chasing down more stories and they're asking him for comment. And then all of a sudden he's just like, well, you know, I'm going to go ahead and not run for re-election. And he had faith. He was in a runoff against Brandon Herrera. So Herrera kind of became the default nominee.
That's right. Good memory. And that bald-faced lie, just the Clinton style. I did not have sex with that woman, for the people who are old. So let's talk a little bit about how to handle a scandal like this. So Jorge Borrego is in a bit of a scandal. It isn't a Geo scandal, and it isn't a Gonzales scandal. It's about passwords and actions and statements and perhaps inactions now. So I don't know if my listeners know this. You're a member of the media. You get it. I did a lot of crisis communications, and I was hired for much of my career to handle situations like this. And one of the downsides for Borrego's tactic, which is, ha, 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 I was a young man, 16 to 20, is people like you and I are going to talk about it. It's going to continue to make the news, in part because he didn't own it, be accountable for it. Just like Geo, just like Slaton, no, all these people, and then they ultimately have to resign. So, as a member of the press, what do you think one should do who finds himself in a situation like this?
Well, I think the right thing always to do is to tell the truth, admit fault, and discuss what you're going to do to kind of make up for or prevent that action from happening again. I will say that on the receiving end of or the viewing end of a lot of these scandals, I do see that they often take the tactic of just either not apologizing or waiting it out, and that's a very effective tactic, just waiting it out. The news cycle is so quick nowadays that and people's memory on this stuff is that of a goldfish. So I think it was Adam Lowy, I think that even brought this up in a tweet of his once, that where he was like, you just got to wait 3 days, and scandals, doesn't matter what scandal it is, you'll be able to weather it just 3 to 5 days, and that's it. And that's generally true. It generally doesn't matter unless it's of a certain caliber, what type of scandal it is. You just wait it out a little bit. And especially if it's not that bad of one, if you don't apologize, you just wait it out, keep quiet about it. People will move on, people will forget. And heck, some of these people just get reelected. I think my brain goes back to Clay Jenkins, Judge Clay Jenkins in DFW. We had posted a story with his old mugshot from back in his college days, back in Waco, and he had, and I'm not joking here, it's on our website. He had quite literally wore blackface, and let me read the police report, quote unquote. He had on dark oil type or paint or dark makeup on their faces to make them look like black people. That's literally in the police report. So you've got Judge Clay Jenkins, who's a hardcore left-leaning Democrat, and he's got this police report that surfaced where he broke into young female college students' dorms and was stealing their underwear.
Whoa.
Okay? And
creepy.
Creepy. And he's an elected judge now, and he's won re-election, and so going back to the point, you weather these things that come out, and you just kind of just don't address them. Generally, you can live through it. But again, I'm not a professional. I just mostly see it on the viewing end. But that's how I think that a lot of these politicians survive, is just waiting it out.
Well, you may well be right. Times have changed. So look, if you're just joining us, Anthony Holm, host of Politics with Big Dogs. We have Tony Ortiz, publisher of Current Revolt. I strongly encourage everybody to sign up, even for the free one if you have to, only at currentrevolt.com, because it's just so much compelling news. It's a top 3 outlet that I read daily. So now I want to back up. As you know, I used to run candidate campaigns and issue campaigns for a big chunk of my career. I'm much older than you and kind of been working for 25 plus years. I want to talk about how we got Jorge Borrego, and here's why. And I'm very troubled by it, because this is going to be a tough November. We're probably going to lose some Texas House seats to the D's when I say lose them. And Borrego is a bad candidate, independent of these, because he's so conservative for that district. He aligns, frankly, with me on policy issues. I'm a really strong conservative. But there was no way that somebody like Jorge Borrego, with his policy position, is going to win in November. And everybody knew that. Abbott knew it. The Governor Abbott, who endorsed him in that 3-way primary, TLR put $400,000 behind him, because the guy who could win was named Desi Martinez, who's a much more moderate, 100% moderate, but he's a Republican trial lawyer. And Lujan, who held the seat He was the Republican anomaly. He could hold the seat, said, this is the guy, this is the guy. Well, Texans for Lawsuit Reform can't have a Republican trial lawyer in the Republican caucus because that lawyer will be able to expose what their bills actually do, right? And one of the reasons I say that is you did a truth test of a commercial I wrote and produced from my C4, I don't know, a year and a half, 2 years ago, and it was about a Jeff Leach bill. And he said, well, Jeff Leach made a big tweet, and he said, okay, well, let's go figure this out. And you did reporting that's where you caught my attention because it was the depth of reporting was so substantial, like, holy smokes, he gets it. And not to toot my own horn, but I think some version was like, hey, this is true or wholly true or mostly, it was overwhelmingly true. There's no way around it. But once other Republicans in the House caucus started learning, like, holy smokes, that's true. That's not what TLR told us. It started flipping people. So it's really dangerous. And the reason I flag it is because there are groups and people who have interests, and then there's groups or people who believe about policy outcomes, right? Like, it may be at times in a lobby group's interest to elect a Democrat instead of a Republican. And I don't think it should be in Governor Abbott's interest. I think it was in his interest to capitulate to a bunch of rich businessmen who give him millions of dollars. Basically, there's an insurance front group. But here's what happened. Desi Martinez was running strong in that primary, and Abbott came in and personally started visiting and endorsing Borrego, and TLR came in with $400,000, and Borrego became the nominee. And those guys just like wiped their brows. Oh, we kept a trial lawyer out who's a Republican. But then they haven't done anything for Borrego. I mean, he had $13,000 in his campaign finance report at the end and in the July 16th filing. And that's before these text messages came out. They surrendered that seat straight up to a liberal Democrat in Carranza, and she's going to win it. And they did it when they nominated Borrego. And I say this is Dan Patrick's kid, Ryan Patrick, who then took over TLR recently and said, hey, we gave millions of Democrats in the past, but those are sins of the former. This is 2.0. They just flipped this seat to a Democrat. We might have lost it anyway, but they for sure flipped it. So I'm not asking you to agree with that, but what do you think about that? What's it mean to a Republican House majority that every vote matters when we're trying to lower property taxes and do these other things that are so important?
I think you hit the nail on the head that, when it comes to specific lobbying group pushing special interests, they don't really care if there's an R or D next to their name, or if their candidate, 90% of their candidate, what they agree with is maybe bad for Texas, or they don't even have a chance. They just want to they either want to get this person into the primary and knock out their opponent, or they're willing to sacrifice a seat so that the person that's anti their interests doesn't get elected. Like, and it could be in this case that where they maybe, the other Republican candidate was more likely to defeat the Democrat, but it's possible they were more concerned with just getting him out of the race, and they've got this guy now as the Republican nominee. And as you kind of hinted at, maybe they've just kind of left them out there in the dust, where they're just like, well, we've at least addressed the big issue and the concern. We don't really care. From their
perspective.
Right. From their perspective, we've addressed our concerns. We don't really care what happens after the fact. So if a Democrat wins, that's fine. If our guy ends up winning, that's cool too. That may be the case here.
It looks like it. I mean, they haven't given a penny to him, and now they're going to have an excuse and say, oh, well, there's all these texts. But Abbott did this too. Abbott needs every vote to move property tax reform, to protect our children, right? Like, to do lots of conservative values. I mean, do you think there's any way that we could pass a constitutional amendment if we needed to in the House, get 100 votes?
No, absolutely not, and especially after this next cycle. I can't remember if you said you thought this earlier, but I do think that it's not going to be a great election for Republicans in the midterms. And so, yeah, I am concerned about next session for sure. Again, I'm not a consultant, and I don't pretend to be one, but I see this campaigning right now, and it's the way that they're propping up these candidates, and A lot of it's not, hey, my candidate's really good, from the Republican side. They're not saying, my candidate's really good, you should vote for my guy because he's going to do X, Y, and Z. A lot of it's like, don't vote for my opponent because he's bad and blah, blah, blah. He's this and this and this. And like, I don't think that pushing a narrative of really hating somebody is enough to get people excited to go vote. You need to actually be excited about your candidate. It reminds me of like the 2016 presidential cycle where, Hillary Clinton was a terrible candidate. And her messaging was to try to win was, you may not like me, but Donald Trump is the worst racist Nazi, Hitler, bad guy in the entire world. Like, you need to vote for me because he's so bad. And clearly that didn't work. And so it kind of, I get the impression, again, I'm not a consultant, I don't analyze these things, but it feels like, at least on my end, it feels like a lot of these Republican candidates currently for this midterm cycle aren't really promoting themselves on, hey, I'm going to do a lot of these really great things. It's a lot of, the opponent's really bad. He's a creepy guy and he does this and he's a vegan. And it's like, I don't think that makes voters excited to go to the ballot box. And you need Republicans to go out and vote in order to get the down ballot, elected as well.
That's a good point. That's a really good point. I do not feel enthusiasm among ours. And I'm hearing the same thing that you're relaying, which is person X, this Democrat is for social welfare and they want to take your home. They want to take your property. And that can be an effective message, in my opinion. But we are not out motivating. And thank goodness the Democrats aren't saying, I'm going to run a property tax reform, because the Republicans have watched your property tax go up for 30 years while they've been in control. Or I'm going to run on slicing the budget down because they just grew the budget by like 15% while they had absolute, juggernaut control over the legislative process. Thank goodness they're running on, you got to change the law to let kids be transitioned by their parents. There's something out there that it's just shocking. I'm surprised the Dems aren't doing more, but hallelujah.
Yeah, we had a really great last session, actually. We make the joke that every year Republicans say that it's the most conservative session ever. And actually, last session was really, really decent, like really good. A lot of the grassroots right, Republican right, were very negative on Burrows and cautious on Burrows, and I could probably fill into that camp as well, for sure. And he seems to have come around, and he seems to kind of be wanting to push a lot of really good conservative legislator. And of course, like all things, it's not perfect and things can always be better, and there's always like criticisms and there's always scams to uncover and whatnot. But, we did have a good last session, and we, Texas is a great place on if you're a pro-life person, we're solid. If you're a pro-gun person, we're very solid. Pro-free speech, we're very solid. But the issues I think that are facing a lot of Americans, all Americans, across the U.S., not just here in Texas, is, property taxes, cost of living, the car insurance rates are really high, home insurance rates are really high, and economic issues are at the top of, I think, a lot of people's minds. And, it doesn't, for me as media, I guess, and also as an individual, I don't feel like Republicans are doing enough to address these issues. And man, I see some of the way my non-political friends talk about politics, and these are people that don't watch the news. They're not on Twitter. They're neutral, or at least they were neutral on Trump. They just don't care. But they're now starting to get really frustrated with the cost of living, and they're all starting to talk about voting Democrat. It's not a great thing. It's not a great thing.
Well, I want to understand that more, but we'll probably have to have you on for another episode. I want to grab a couple things that you said. So very few people knew Dustin Burrows, right? He came in, he was an outcast. I knew Dustin closely as a close personal friend for like a decade prior to him coming in. Our families were close, so I knew what he believed on philosophical governance. We don't keep up. We used to speak many times a week for years and years. We haven't kept up since he's been elected speaker at all. But I'm not surprised where he is on policy personally. I am surprised on the tactics of how he got there. I'm surprised on, okay, we're not going to have Republican chairs, but we're going to create these things called vice chairs, and we're going to give them money who will go to the Democrats that really are kind of effectively, chairs of committees, and they're going to have the power to bring up bills. I'm surprised on some of that. But the policy outcomes, I am not surprised on. In fact, I think he's philosophically as free market as anybody in the Texas Senate, as any of the big three. He has the guy has an MBA and a JD. He's a free market foundationalist. And what you said was people on living, cost of living. Like I have spoken many times. You don't have to agree with this or even comment if you don't choose to. But I'm going to present to the listener, as I have, Texas went from free market to a community of big business, right? Like now everybody's in this data center trouble. Well, all the Republicans and many of the Democrats gave like $3 billion in tax breaks to bring in all these data centers, and now they're wanting to ban them and outlaw them. I mean, if the Democrats ever ran on that, here's the 5 times all these R's and marginal seats voted to give a tax break to data centers while your property taxes are going up. Here's the business court where they created their own court just to have litigation that's controlled by the governor, and all these Republicans went for it. There's a lot of these things that became driven by special interests as opposed to philosophical policy. I know at least Dustin Burrows was a philosophical policy guy, and I really honored him for it. It's one of the friendships that I cherished so much at the time. So I'm not surprised at many of these outcomes, and we'll see what happens. I think he's probably well positioned at least for another one. Do you have thoughts or comment on that?
Yeah, I think so too. I think though, our numbers in the ledge, I think, lean towards more where you sometimes have to have Democrats help to get a speaker properly elected sometimes, and or at least to get some votes and things done. And it may be a little bit more of a struggle this session, at least, to get across that finish line. I think Democrats, because Speaker Burrows did get elected by getting Democrat votes.
I think primarily, actually, a majority of these initially. And
now you've got these Democrats, at least on again from the Democrats' perspective, they feel burned. Like, oh, this guy's actually super, super conservative, and he's doing a lot of the things that we maybe didn't anticipate he would do. And I think that maybe they're going to put up more of a fight this session. We'll see.
They might. I think there's going to be more of them. Whether it's 2 more or 4 more here, we're going to lose Lujan, and I'll bet $1,000 right now Borrego loses, right? Like Carranza's in. It's just one more D. So those matter in the mix. There's no way around it. But and the last thing is, I know David Cook, but I didn't know him well. I also bet $1,000 that Burrows is exponentially more conservative on a clean free market policy than a David Cook. And then the irony in that, right? Like everybody in the Republican circles were upset about Cook. Now there's an argument of process over outcomes. I get it. But we're here, and if it's Dustin Burrows or whoever the speaker is, I do think it'll be Burrows, then they're going to have to deal with fewer Republicans. There's just no way around it.
Yeah, they have to deal with fewer Republicans, and like you said, a lot of it's due to just lack of enthusiasm, but also, like you mentioned earlier, like you have these special interest groups that don't really care about the greater picture. It's and I get this because they're special interest groups. They care about their special interest, and if as long as they kill that, the problem against it, or what they're trying, or what they stand for, or as long as what they stand for gets passed, they don't care if there's an R or D next to their name. That's their goal. And so, yeah, you're going to see, you did get some candidates that are the nominees for the Republicans, and they're are not the best choice that are going to struggle this come November.
And look, the D's did it too, and hallelujah, because they've got, wacko positions. You said something earlier that has been a mantra of mine, which is it the right thing for Texas? If that is the standard of your vote, Republican, Democrat, or otherwise, as an elected official, even if you're voting against what I believe is the right thing for Texas, I honor you and I'm in. You know, if we can have a debate, what is right for Texas and why, then shoot, everything else will work itself out. So, Tony, I kept you a lot longer than I expected, and thank you for so much time. Is there anything that we failed to touch?
No, this was great. We should do it more often, but I think we did cover pretty much everything. And, as you know, here in Texas, it's another day goes by, and I'm sure there's much, much more that we'll have to we can go over,
Well, I'd love to have you back on, and we'll start hitting these, and we'll be more efficient with our time. Thank you for so much time today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Anthony. Don't forget to sign up for our newsletter at politicswiththebigdogs.com. We'll keep you informed on new episodes, new guests, and new opportunities for your voice to be heard across Texas. Learn more and sign up today at politicswiththebigdogs.com.
All right, folks, so we just have a little bit of time, but we've got to touch on a couple of things here. So first, this notion of so-called universal basic income, right? It is standardized welfare for every family in America, just straight up. What's it going to do? It's going to increase inflation, of course, because when families are just given money, then when our federal government is just producing, literally printing more money and handing it to families, we have more cash flowing in the system. So what's it do? It reduces the value of all the other cash in your checking account and otherwise today. So the other thing it does is it massively inflates the price of goods and services. And why? Because more people are competing for them. They have more money to go and spend on them. If you have $100 in your pocket, you can't spend more than $100 on your groceries, right? But if the government gives you a check for $1,000, for example, now you have $1,100 in your pocket. You can spend up to $1,100 on your groceries, right? That's just like basic supply and demand. And the reason that I flag that is because many on the left are using this as a tagline to try to get votes. And I believe they're doing it in a corrupt partnership, basically, with higher education, with our universities and colleges, because they're indoctrinating our children with these liberal ideologies, and frankly, many of the public school systems are as well. And then people like James Tallarico, who is one of them, who goes out on the campaign trail and says, look, every family in America should receive enough money each month to cover their basic necessities, including food and housing, just straight up. That's not a UBI. That's not $1,000 a month. That's not some of these experiments that like California cities and the state of California is giving to homeless and drug users. Hey, we're going to make sure to give you $1,000 in cash every day, even though you're living on the street doing drugs and you're going to use it to buy more drugs. Tallarico takes it farther. Tallarico is saying every family, every person, everyone should receive an income to cover basic necessities, including food and housing. Now, Tallarico's not saying everybody should have a job to get there. When asked on what he believes in terms of federal handouts, just straight away welfare spending, he's like, oh, yeah, I support a UBI, and it's got to cover both their food and their housing. Shoot, housing can be $1,000, $2,000, $3,000, and food can be $2,000 a month for a family. He's wanting to give out $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 a month. Doesn't matter to him. This is his position. What's it mean? It means like if he got his way for America, about 50% of the federal budget, $7.4 trillion, would be spent on welfare. Right now we're doing about $1 out of $5 of the federal budget, and that includes obviously the deficit is on welfare spending. And the reason I'm flagging this is because our debt as a nation and the debt that we've put on our children and our grandchildren has just exceeded our gross domestic production, our GDP, gross domestic product, as I struggle through that. Sorry. When you start handing out money without at least a requirement for work. And here's why it's significant, because the data is unequivocal. It doesn't matter if it's a conservative think tank, liberal think tank, conservative economist, liberal economist, the data is, there is no way around the fact that when we hand out money to anyone in our society without a requirement for work, we have a work participation rate go down. What's it do? It causes fewer and fewer people to enter the workforce because they don't have to. The government's handing them a money. And then what else does it do? It keeps that individual and often, if not usually, their children in this cycle of government dependency. And the reason it's important in the here and now is because James Tallarico is a fervent advocate of this system of welfare payments, top to bottom by government. What's it going to do? It's going to increase the taxes on you and me, obviously, and it's going to decrease the participation rate in the workforce. We saw this really, really conspicuously on the backside of COVID, right? So many people had gotten so much federal money just granted to them under the COVID debacle that we couldn't get low-paid jobs filled. Starbucks is closing, right? And the great tragedy of a Starbucks closing, that is a metaphor, that is an example, rather, of all of these other businesses that couldn't stay open because people didn't want to work. They didn't have to work. Why? Because government had just given them a big old check. And then what happened? You and I and our children and probably their grandchildren basically got hit with another $2 trillion with a T. That's trillion in debt that some U.S. citizen, some U.S. taxpaying citizen is going to have to pay off at some point in time. Think about this. Think about what it means. Tallarico, who's never really had a job, best I can tell, still sharing a bank account with his mom, is saying, oh, no, we got to hand out checks to everybody in America. And who's we? Government. So who's government? Or at least who funds government? You do. I do. Those of us who pay taxes. We fund government. So Tallarico is running not just to deliver to the Texans, but to deliver this policy and this notion to America of free money, massively increasing the welfare state, which will require massive increases both in debt and our taxes, and will severely depress people who choose and elect to work. It is a cycle that is a spiral down into absolute bankruptcy. It's just lunacy. Yet this is Tallarico. And contrast it with Republicans in Texas who have really grown the infrastructure to defend big business at the expense of free markets. We have moved as a state led by Republican leadership, away from open market system where mom and pops and individuals and entrepreneurs have the rights and the opportunity to go out there without all of the red tape, and move squarely into this environment where Republicans are defending massive insurance companies and defending massive businesses, and they're acting and thinking first on behalf of the billion-dollar companies. Tallarico wants to just hand out the money paid in taxes by the mom and pops. We've got a misalignment of values and a misalignment of elected officials and candidates who are willing to defend a belief system instead of advancing the interest of a donor. All right, folks, that was an incredible show for you. So much there. There's so much. It was a great joy. I'm so glad that Tony joined us on the show, Tony Ortiz, publisher of Current Revolt. I have spoken about that outlet. I've spoken about Texas Bullhorn as well, and a few others that I get a lot of content and ideas and thoughts from. These are things that I follow daily. I also read the Wall Street Journal daily. I encourage you, if these resonated with you, if they meant something, follow them. Just get on. It's a daily free email. They also had a paid subscription, which I have joined, but forever and a day I used the free one and really enjoyed it. So follow that. Get on it. Also, let's look ahead. Let's make sure that our Republicans are delivering. It's not just a big business, a pro-big business marketplace in Texas anymore, that it comes back to a free market system. And independent about your thoughts on Dustin Burrows and the outcomes that we had last session, I believe those outcomes are strong. Again, he and I haven't kept up at all since he's become Speaker, but I did have a friendship with him prior. I suspect a strong friendship with him, at least I thought it was, and I suspect that he is reelected as Speaker again. Now, if you think otherwise, contact us. Let's hear it. Let me understand why, and I'll tell you why I'm hearing that, because I've had so many Republicans, members of the Texas House, say basically like, holy smokes, we didn't think we'd be able to accomplish that much as we did last session. They're trying to forgive sins basically on how he got there. I don't know if it'll work. I think it will. I think he'll have another session in leadership, but we'll see. I'm open to being wrong, and I'd like your opinion on it. I know that's a real touchstone, and I may lose some listeners for having laid it out that way, but that's my read on it, and if I'm wrong, I'll own it on the backside. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for fighting for freedom, continuing to advance liberty. You guys are incredible. You're affecting change all over the place, and we'll do a touchback after the November election and see what happened to Borrego and see what happened to some of these other people. So fight on for your families, fight on for liberty. Thank you for listening, and God bless you, and God bless Texas.
Politics with the Big Dogs with Anthony Holm is supported in part by the First Amendment Alliance Education Fund. Learn more about today's guest and hear other episodes online in our archive. Visit politicswiththebigdogs.com. If you have a question for Anthony Holm, email Anthony at politicswiththebigdogs.com. From deep in the heart of Texas, you've been listening to Politics with the Big Dogs.